The letter trembled in my hands, its crisp edges a stark contrast to the turmoil it unleashed within me. I read it again, hoping the words would somehow rearrange themselves into a less disruptive message. They didn't. "Jenny, what's wrong?" Paul's voice cut through my daze. I looked up to see my husband's concerned face, his brow furrowed as he took in my expression. I swallowed hard. "It's about your mother, Paul. She's been evicted. She's homeless." Paul's face hardened instantly, a mix of anger and something else. Guilt, perhaps, flashing across his features. "What? How's that even possible? She's always been so particular about her finances." I handed him the letter, watching as he scanned its contents. His jaw clenched tighter with each line. "Well," he said finally, tossing the letter onto the kitchen counter, "I suppose she's made her bed. Now she can lie in it." "Paul," I began, my voice gentle but firm, "she's your mother. We can't just—" "Can't we?" he interrupted, his tone sharp. "After everything she's done? The years of neglect, the criticism, the—" "Mommy? Daddy?" Our daughter's small voice drifted down the stairs. "Why are you yelling?" Paul's expression softened immediately. "It's nothing, sweetheart. Go back to bed." I waited until I heard her door close before continuing. "I know your relationship with Mildred is complicated, but she's family, Paul. We can't leave her on the streets." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every movement. "What are you suggesting, Jenny? That we invite her to live with us? Because I can tell you right now, that's not happening." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the words I knew I had to say. "Actually, that's exactly what I'm suggesting." Paul's eyes widened in disbelief. "You can't be serious." "I am," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "It's the right thing to do." "The right thing?" Paul scoffed. "Was it the right thing when she missed our wedding, or when she criticized every decision we've ever made?" I reached out, taking his hand in mine. "I know it's not ideal, but she's still your mother, Paul, and right now, she needs us." He pulled away, pacing the kitchen. "You don't know her like I do, Jenny. She'll take advantage of your kindness. She always does." "Then we'll set boundaries," I insisted. "We'll make it clear that this is temporary, that there are rules she needs to follow." Paul stopped, leaning against the counter. For a long moment he said nothing, just stared at the discarded letter. Finally he sighed. "I can't believe I'm even considering this." I moved closer, wrapping my arms around him. "We'll get through it together. I promise." He hugged me back, his embrace tight. "You're too good for this family, you know that?" I laughed softly. "I'm just doing what any decent person would do." As we stood there in our kitchen, the weight of our decision settling around us, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to invite a storm into our home. But I pushed the thought aside. This was the right thing to do. It had to be. Little did I know as I drifted off to sleep that night that my act of compassion would soon become the greatest test our family had ever faced, and that the woman I was trying to save would become the very threat I needed saving from. The day Mildred arrived, our house seemed to shrink. I stood in the doorway, watching Paul help his mother up the front steps, her frail form leaning heavily on his arm. My daughter, Emily, peeked out from behind me, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Welcome, Mildred," I said, forcing a smile. "We're glad you're here." Mildred's gaze swept over me, then settled on Emily. "Well, aren't you a pretty little thing?" she cooed, her voice syrupy sweet. "Come give your grandma a hug." Emily hesitated, looking up at me. I nodded encouragingly, even as a knot formed in my stomach. As Emily stepped forward, Mildred enveloped her in a tight embrace. "My, you're awfully thin," Mildred remarked, her eyes darting to me. "Don't they feed you, child?" I felt my cheeks flush. "Emily eats just fine, Mildred. She's perfectly healthy." Paul cleared his throat. "Let's get you settled, Mom. Jenny's prepared the guest room for you." As they disappeared upstairs, I retreated to the kitchen, busying myself with dinner preparations. The sound of Mildred's laughter drifted down, mingling with Emily's excited chatter. I tried to focus on the vegetables I was chopping, but my mind kept wandering to the changes this new arrangement would bring. Later that evening, after Emily was tucked in bed, the three of us sat in the living room. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. "I can't thank you both enough," Mildred finally said, her eyes glistening. "I know I haven't been the best mother, Paul, or the best mother-in-law, Jenny. But I want you to know how truly sorry I am for my past behavior." Paul shifted in his seat. "Mom, We don't need to. No, please, Mildred interrupted. Let me say this. I've made so many mistakes, pushed away the people I love most, but being here, seeing your beautiful family, it's made me realize what truly matters. I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this could work after all. We're happy to help, Mildred. Family is important. Mildred reached out, clasping my hand. You're an angel, Jenny. I don't deserve such kindness. The next morning, I woke early to prepare breakfast before work. To my surprise, Mildred was already in the kitchen, a stack of pancakes on the table. Oh, good morning, I said, startled. You didn't have to do this. Mildred waved her hand dismissively. Nonsense. It's the least I can do. Besides, I noticed you didn't have any real maple syrup, so I used some honey I found. Much healthier for Emily, don't you think? I bit back a retort about Emily's carefully planned diet. That's thoughtful of you. As we ate, Mildred regaled us with stories from Paul's childhood. It was nice seeing Paul laugh at the memories, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That afternoon, I returned from work to find the house spotless. Mildred beamed at me from the couch where she sat folding laundry. I hope you don't mind, she said. I just wanted to help out. Not at all, I replied, even as I noticed my favorite blouse, now shrunken and misshapen. Thank you. Days passed, and Mildred's presence became increasingly noticeable. She rearranged the kitchen cabinets for better efficiency. She suggested improvements to Emily's bedtime routine. She even offered to update our family budget. Each change was small, each suggestion seemingly well-intentioned, but together they felt like a slow erosion of the life Paul and I had built. One evening, as I prepared dinner, Mildred hovered nearby. You know, dear, she began, her tone casual, I've always found that a pinch of nutmeg really elevates a pasta sauce. I gripped the spoon tighter. This is how Paul likes it. Oh, of course, Mildred said, patting my arm. I'm sure you know best. It's just, well, Paul always loved my cooking growing up, but I'm sure your way is fine. As I stirred the sauce, I caught my reflection in the window. The woman staring back looked tired, frustrated, and increasingly unsure of herself. I wondered how long I could keep up this balancing act before something or someone snapped. The sound of shattering glass jolted me awake. I bolted upright, heart pounding, to find Mildred standing in the doorway of our bedroom, a broken picture frame at her feet. Oh, I'm so sorry, she simpered, not sounding sorry at all. I was just dusting, and it slipped. I glanced at the clock, 5:30 a.m. Mildred, what are you doing up so early? She bent to pick up the shards, sking. Well, someone has to keep this house in order. Lord knows you don't have the time, what with your career and all. Paul stirred beside me. What's going on? It's nothing, dear, Mildred cooed. Go back to sleep. Jenny and I were just discussing her unique approach to housekeeping. I bit my tongue, forcing a smile. I've got this, Mildred. Why don't you go start breakfast? As she left, I examined the broken frame. It was our wedding photo. The day unraveled from there. At breakfast, Mildred accidentally spilled coffee on my work blouse. Then she questioned my decision to let Emily wear shorts to school. It's supposed to be 80 degrees today, I explained, exasperated. Mildred raised an eyebrow. In my day, young ladies dressed modestly, but I suppose times have changed. Paul, engrossed in his newspaper, seemed oblivious to the tension. At work, I couldn't focus. My phone buzzed incessantly with texts from Mildred, each one a thinly veiled criticism. By lunchtime, I was a bundle of nerves. Jenny? My colleague Sarah touched my arm. Are you okay? You seem off. I forced a laugh. Just family stuff, nothing I can't handle. But as the day wore on, I wasn't so sure. Arriving home, I found the house in chaos. Emily was watching TV, homework forgotten, dishes piled in the sink. And Mildred? She sat in my favorite chair, flipping through our family photo album. Oh, Jenny, she said, not looking up. I'm glad you're home. I was just thinking how lovely it would be to redecorate. This room is so dated. I took a deep breath. Mildred, where's Paul? He called to say he'd be late, some work emergency. She waved her hand dismissively. Men and their careers, always so important. The implication hung in the air. I busied myself with the dishes, trying to ignore the growing knot in my stomach. Mommy? Emily tugged at my sleeve. Can we have pizza for dinner? Before I could answer, Mildred chimed in. Now, Emily, your mother works so hard. I'm sure she'd love to cook us a nice, healthy meal. Isn't that right, Jenny? I gripped the edge of the sink, knuckles white. Actually, pizza sounds great. Why don't you order, Mildred? My treat. Mildred's eyes narrowed. Well, if you insist on feeding your child junk food. That night, after Emily was in bed, I found myself alone with Mildred. Paul was still at work. Jenny, dear, Mildred began, her voice sickly sweet. I hope you don't mind me saying, but I've noticed Emily seems a bit behind in her studies. Have you considered tutoring? I felt something snap inside me. Emily is doing fine, Mildred. Her teachers say she's excelling. Mildred clicked her tongue. Oh, I'm sure they do. Teachers these days always coddling children. In my day... This isn't your day, I interrupted, surprising myself with my vehemence. This is our home, our family, and I'd appreciate it if you'd stop undermining every decision I make. Silence fell between us. Mildred's face hardened, the mask of sweetness slipping. I see, she said coldly. Well, if that's how you feel, perhaps it was a mistake for me to come here. I'm sure Paul would be interested to hear how you're treating his mother. As if on cue, we heard Paul's key in the lock. Mildred's face instantly transformed, a benign smile replacing the cold fury of moments before. Paul, darling, she called out. We're in here. Jenny and I were just having the most interesting chat about family loyalty. I stood there, frozen, as Paul entered the room. The look Mildred shot me was clear. This was war, and she intended to win. The leather-bound journal felt heavy in my hands as I stared at its blank pages. I'd never been one for keeping a diary, but desperate times called for desperate measures. With a deep breath, I put pen to paper. Day 1. Mildred suggested to Paul that I might be overwhelmed and offered to take over meal planning. Paul agreed before I could object. As the days passed, the journal became my sanctuary. Each entry was a silent scream, a record of the slow erosion of my authority in my own home. Day 7. Mildred reorganized my closet. Half my clothes are missing. She claims they were unflattering. Day 12. Found Mildred going through our financial records. She told Paul we're overspending on frivolities. He's now questioning every purchase. One afternoon, I returned from work to find Emily in tears. Mildred stood over her, a stern expression on her face. What's going on? I demanded, rushing to comfort my daughter. Mildred sniffed. I was just explaining to Emily that her artwork isn't quite up to par for her age. Honesty is important, Jenny. I felt a surge of anger. She's 7, Mildred. Art isn't about perfection, it's about expression. Well, Mildred replied, her voice dripping with condescension, I suppose that explains a lot about your decorating choices. That night I wrote furiously in my journal, my hand cramping from the effort. Day 15. Mildred criticized Emily's art. I can't let this continue. I need to talk to Paul. But every time I tried to broach the subject with Paul, Mildred seemed to materialize, steering the conversation away. It was as if she had a sixth sense for any threat to her position. Things came to a head during Sunday dinner. Mildred had insisted on cooking, filling the house with the aroma of pot roast, Paul's favorite. This is delicious, Mom, Paul said between bites. Just like I remember. Mildred beamed. Well, I always say there's no substitute for a mother's touch in the kitchen. I felt my cheeks burn. I cook for this family every day, Mildred. Of course you do, dear, she replied, patting my hand. And it's adequate. But there's a certain warmth that comes from a grandmother's cooking, don't you think, Paul? Before Paul could answer, Emily piped up. I like Mommy's cooking better. The silence that followed was deafening. Mildred's face darkened, and for a moment I saw a flash of the woman behind the mask, cold, calculating, and furious. Well, Mildred said, her voice tight, children often don't know what's best for them. That's why they need proper guidance. The look she gave me left no doubt as to who she thought was failing to provide that guidance. Later that night, I sat at the kitchen table, my journal open before me. The house was quiet, everyone else asleep. I wrote feverishly, pouring out weeks of frustration and fear. I can't take this anymore. Mildred is poisoning our family. She undermines me at every turn, criticizes Emily and Paul. Paul can't see what's happening, or won't see. I feel like I'm going crazy. Am I overreacting? Am I the problem? A floorboard creaked behind me. I whirled around to see Mildred standing in the doorway, her eyes fixed on my journal. Trouble sleeping, dear? She asked, her voice honey-sweet but her eyes cold. I slammed the journal shut, just finishing up some work. Mildred's gaze lingered on the book. You know, Jenny, a happy home requires honesty. Secrets can be so destructive. As she turned to leave, her meaning was clear. This was a threat. I looked down at my journal, my lifeline these past weeks. I knew I had a choice to make. I could stay silent, let Mildred continue her slow takeover of our lives, or I could fight back, risks be damned. With shaking hands, I opened the journal again and wrote one final line. Tomorrow, I tell Paul everything. The biting winter wind whipped around me as I fumbled with my keys, my fingers numb from the cold. It was well past midnight, and I'd been stuck at work dealing with a last-minute crisis. All I wanted was to crawl into bed and forget this day had ever happened. But as I tried to insert the key into the lock, I realized something was wrong. The key wouldn't turn. Frowning, I tried again. Then again. Nothing. No, I muttered, panic rising in my chest. I rang the doorbell, praying Paul would hear it. Silence. I pulled out my phone, dialing Paul's number. Straight to voicemail. With shaking hands, I tried Mildred's number. It rang once, twice, 3 times before going to voicemail. Mildred, it's Jenny. I'm locked out. Please, if you hear this, let me in. It's freezing out here. I pounded on the door, my desperation growing with each unanswered knock. Paul, Mildred, anyone. The neighbor's lights flicked on and I felt a flash of embarrassment. But it was quickly overshadowed by the realization that I was truly locked out of my own home. As I huddled on the porch trying to shield myself from the wind, a memory surfaced. Mildred's words from earlier that day, "You know, Jenny, a happy home requires honesty. Secrets can be so destructive." Had she done this on purpose? Changed the locks to teach me a lesson? No, I thought. Even Mildred wouldn't go that far. Would she? Hours passed, each minute an eternity in the frigid night. I tried calling again and again, leaving increasingly frantic messages. I paced the porch, trying to keep warm, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. What if something had happened to them? What if there had been a carbon monoxide leak and they were all unconscious inside? Or what if Mildred had convinced Paul to take Emily and leave? As dawn broke, casting a pale light over the frost-covered lawn, I heard movement inside the house. Hope surged through me as I rushed to the door, knocking frantically. The door swung open, revealing Mildred in her robe, a look of exaggerated surprise on her face. "Jenny? What on earth are you doing out here?" I pushed past her into the warmth of the house, my entire body shaking. "I've been locked out all night." "Didn't you hear me knocking? Didn't you get my messages?" Mildred's face was a mask of innocence. "Oh dear, I must have forgotten to unlock the door when I went to bed, and you know how I turn off my phone at night, doctor's orders, for my blood pressure." Paul appeared at the top of the stairs, looking confused. "Jenny, what's going on?" Before I could respond, Mildred jumped in. "Poor Jenny got locked out last night. She must have lost her key." "I didn't lose my key," I snapped, my patience finally shattering. "The locks have been changed." Paul frowned. "What? No, they haven't." "Yes, they have," I insisted. "My key didn't work." Mildred skeeked sympathetically. "Darling, you must have been so tired. Are you sure you were using the right key?" I opened my mouth to argue, but the words died on my lips as I saw the doubt in Paul's eyes. He believed her. Of course he did. I need to lie down," I mumbled, pushing past them both and heading upstairs. In our bedroom, I collapsed onto the bed, exhaustion and despair washing over me. I could hear Paul and Mildred talking in low voices downstairs, no doubt discussing my confusion. As I lay there, shivering despite the warmth of the house, I realized something with stark clarity. I wasn't safe here. Not anymore. Not with Mildred's growing influence and Paul's willful blindness. I sat up, a new determination filling me. I couldn't let this continue. I couldn't let Mildred win. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone and dialed a number I never thought I'd use. "Sarah, it's Jenny. I need your help. Can I stay with you for a while? I'll explain everything, I promise. I can't stay here anymore." As I hung up, I knew I was at a crossroads. Stay and fight, or leave to protect myself and Emily. Either way, nothing would ever be the same again. The wind howled as I stumbled down the snow-covered street, my entire body shaking uncontrollably. I'd left the house in a daze, Sarah's promise of shelter, the only thing keeping me moving forward. But as the adrenaline wore off, the reality of my situation hit me like a freight train. I was alone, in the middle of a snowstorm with nowhere to go. My phone, nearly dead, buzzed with incoming calls from Paul. I ignored them, knowing I couldn't face him right now. Not when I was this close to breaking. As I rounded a corner, the wind picked up, nearly knocking me off my feet. That's when I saw her, an elderly woman huddled against a building, barely visible under a mound of tattered blankets. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely audible over the storm. "Are you all right?" The woman stirred, revealing a face etched with lines of hardship. Her eyes, cloudy with cataracts, struggled to focus on me. "Help," she whispered, her voice weak. "Please." Without thinking, I rushed to her side, my own problems momentarily forgotten. "I'm Jenny." "What's your name?" "Alice," she managed, her teeth chattering. "So cold." I fumbled with my phone, fingers numb as I dialed 911. "Hold on, Alice, help is coming." As we waited for the ambulance, I wrapped my coat around Alice, rubbing her arms to generate warmth. She leaned into me, her frail body trembling. "Thank you," she murmured. "Most people, they just walk by." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. How many times had I walked past someone in need, too caught up in my own problems to notice? The ambulance arrived, its sirens piercing through the howling wind. As the paramedics loaded Alice into the vehicle, one of them turned to me. "Ma'am, you should come too. You're showing signs of hypothermia." I hesitated, thinking of Paul, of Emily, of the mess I'd left behind. But as another violent shiver racked my body, I nodded, climbing into the ambulance beside Alice. The warmth of the vehicle was a shock to my system. As feeling returned to my extremities, pain followed, sharp and relentless. I bit back a cry, not wanting to distress Alice further. At the hospital, we were separated. Doctors and nurses swarmed around me, their voices a blur of medical jargon. I caught snippets: severe hypothermia, risk of frostbite, need to warm her slowly. As they worked, my mind drifted. I thought of Mildred, of her smug face as she opened the door this morning. I thought of Paul, his doubt clear in his eyes. And I thought of Emily, innocent and unaware of the turmoil tearing our family apart. Hours passed in a haze of warming blankets and IV fluids. When I finally regained full awareness, I found Paul sitting beside my bed, his face a mask of worry and confusion. "Jenny," he breathed, reaching for my hand. "What happened? Why did you leave?" I opened my mouth to explain, but the words wouldn't come. How could I make him understand the depth of Mildred's manipulation? How could I convey the constant fear, the erosion of my self-worth? Before I could formulate a response, the door opened. Mildred swept in, her face a perfect picture of concern. "Oh, Jenny, dear." She cooed, moving to my other side. "We've been so worried. What were you thinking, running off like that?" I felt my chest tighten, panic rising. This was wrong. She shouldn't be here. This was my safe space, away from her influence. "Get out," I whispered, my voice hoarse. Paul frowned. "Jenny, she's just trying to help." "No," I said, louder this time. "Get her out. I can't do this anymore." Mildred's face hardened, the mask slipping for just a moment. "Now, Jenny, you're clearly not thinking straight. Perhaps it's best if we—" "I said get out!" I screamed, surprising even myself with the force of my outburst. As nurses rushed in, alerted by the commotion, I felt something inside me snap. Tears streamed down my face as I turned to Paul, my voice breaking. "I need you to listen to me. Really listen. Because if you don't, if you can't see what's happening, I don't think our marriage will survive this." In that moment, with Mildred's icy glare boring into me and Paul's bewildered expression, I knew we had reached a point of no return. Everything I had built, everything I loved, hung in the balance. And I was terrified. The hospital room felt suffocating as I clutched my journal, its pages filled with months of pain and frustration. Paul sat beside me, his face a mix of confusion and concern. Mildred hovered near the door, her presence a looming shadow. "Jenny," Paul said softly, "please tell me what's going on." I took a deep breath, my hands shaking. "I've been keeping this journal, documenting everything that's happened since your mother moved in." Mildred's eyes narrowed, but she remained silent. "Everything?" Paul asked, his brow furrowed. I nodded, opening the journal to the first entry. "From the very beginning, Paul. The constant criticism, the undermining, the manipulation." As I read aloud, Paul's expression shifted from disbelief to shock, then to anger. Mildred's face remained impassive, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. "That's preposterous," Mildred interjected when I paused. "Jenny, dear, you're clearly confused. The stress of work, motherhood, it's understandable that you might misinterpret things." I felt a surge of anger. "Misinterpret? Like how you misinterpreted locking me out of my own home?" Paul's head snapped up. What? Oh, for heaven's sake, Mildred scoffed. I told you I simply forgot to unlock the door. It was an honest mistake. No, I said firmly, turning to Paul. Locks were changed. My key didn't work. Paul looked between us, confusion evident on his face. Mom, is this true? Mildred's mask slipped for a moment, revealing a flash of panic. Of course not. Paul, surely you don't believe these wild accusations? I pressed on, my voice gaining strength. What about Emily's artwork? The constant criticism of my parenting? The way you've been trying to control our finances? Paul's face hardened. Mom, what is she talking about? Mildred's demeanor changed instantly. Gone was the sweet, concerned mother-in-law. In her place stood a woman with cold, calculating eyes. You ungrateful little, she hissed, taking a step towards me. After everything I've done for this family? Paul stood up, placing himself between us. Mom, that's enough. Enough? Mildred laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. I'm just getting started. You think your precious wife is so perfect? Let me tell you about the times I've caught her snooping through my things, or the way she undermines my relationship with Emily. I felt my heart racing. That's not true. Paul, you can't believe her. The tension in the room was palpable. Nurses peered in, drawn by the rising voices. I think, Paul said slowly, that we all need to calm down and... Calm down, Mildred shrieked. I will not be treated this way in my own home. It's not your home. I shot back, my patience finally snapping. It's ours, and you've been trying to destroy it from the moment you arrived. Mildred lunged forward, her hand raised. Paul caught her wrist, his face a mask of shock. Mom, what are you doing? Security guards burst into the room, alerted by the commotion. As they escorted Mildred out, her mask completely shattered, revealing the bitter, angry woman beneath. You'll regret this, she spat. Both of you. As the door closed behind her, silence fell. Paul sank into the chair, his head in his hands. I'm so sorry, Jenny, he whispered. I should have known. I reached out, taking his hand. We both wanted to believe the best in her. He looked up, his eyes filled with pain and regret. What do we do now? Before I could answer, a nurse entered. Mrs. Thompson, there's someone here to see you. An elderly woman named Alice? She's quite insistent. I felt a glimmer of hope. Alice, the woman I'd helped in the storm, had come to see me. Perhaps there was still kindness in the world, still a chance for healing. As Paul helped me to my feet, I knew we were at a crossroads. The truth was out, but the real work was just beginning. Could we rebuild what Mildred had tried so hard to destroy? Or would the cracks in our family prove too deep to mend? With Alice waiting and Paul by my side, I took a deep breath and stepped into the hospital corridor, ready to face whatever came next. The day Mildred left our house for good was both a relief and a heartache. Paul stood in the doorway, his face a mask of determination, as he watched his mother's car disappear down the street. I held Emily close, her small hand clutching mine tightly. Is Grandma really gone? Emily asked, her voice small and uncertain. I knelt down, meeting her eyes. Yes, sweetheart, but remember, sometimes people we love can make mistakes. It doesn't mean we stop loving them, but we need to protect ourselves too. Paul turned to us, his eyes glistening. We're going to be okay, he said, pulling us both into a hug. We're stronger together. In the weeks that followed, we worked to rebuild our family. It wasn't easy. There were nights when Paul would wake up, haunted by memories of his childhood and the realization of who his mother truly was. I'd hold him, whispering words of comfort and reassurance. One sunny afternoon, as we were having a picnic in the park, I spotted a familiar face. Alice, I called out, waving to the elderly woman I'd helped that fateful night. Alice's face lit up with recognition. She made her way over to us, leaning heavily on a cane. Jenny? Oh, it's so wonderful to see you. We invited Alice to join us, and as we shared our meal, she told us her story. She'd been homeless for years after losing her job and her savings to a scam. The night I found her was the night she'd given up hope. But you, Jenny, Alice said, her eyes shining, you reminded me that there's still kindness in this world. Paul squeezed my hand, pride evident in his eyes. Emily, fascinated by Alice's stories, peppered her with questions about her life. As we said goodbye to Alice that day, promising to visit her at the shelter where she was staying, I felt a warmth spread through me. This was what family truly meant. Not blood ties or obligation, but love, compassion, and support. Over the next few months, we made it a point to visit Alice regularly. We brought her home-cooked meals, warm clothes, and most importantly, companionship. Emily would read to her, Paul would help with small repairs at the shelter, and I found in Alice the mother figure I'd always longed for. One evening, as we sat around our dinner table, Alice now a regular guest, I looked at the faces of my loved ones and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. "I want to make a toast," I said, raising my glass. "To family, not just the one we're born into, but the one we choose and nurture." Paul smiled, his eyes meeting mine. "To second chances and new beginnings." "To kindness," Alice added, her voice wavering with emotion. "To love," Emily chimed in, giggling as she clinked her juice glass with ours. As laughter filled the room, I realized that the ordeal with Mildred, painful as it was, had taught us all valuable lessons. It had shown us the importance of honesty, the strength found in vulnerability, and the healing power of compassion. Later that night, as Paul and I lay in bed, he turned to me. "Jenny," he said softly, "I don't think I ever properly thanked you." "For what?" I asked, curious. "For not giving up on us, for fighting for our family when I was too blind to see what was happening. You're the strongest person I know." I felt tears prick my eyes. "We're strong together," I whispered, echoing his words from weeks ago. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about the journey we'd been on. The pain, the fear, the doubt. It had all led us here, to this moment of peace and understanding. We'd faced our demons, confronted hard truths, and come out stronger on the other side. And as for Mildred, I hoped that someday she'd find the peace and love she so desperately needed. But for now, our family, expanded and strengthened by adversity, was whole. We had each other and we had Alice, a living reminder that it's never too late for a new chapter, a fresh start, a chosen family. In the quiet of the night, with Paul's steady breathing beside me and the knowledge that Emily slept peacefully down the hall, I felt a profound sense of contentment. We had weathered the storm and emerged into the sunlight, stronger and more united than ever before.